Welcome back, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into the story of Catherine the Great. She became this powerful empress of Russia, but how she actually got there. That's a story full of twists and turns, and it's not your typical history lesson. We're going to be digging into an audio source that one of you sent us, detailing her rise to power. So get ready for some drama, some political maneuvering, and a few surprises along the way.
What's so captivating about Catherine's story is that she really wasn't anyone special at first. I mean, just imagine she starts as Sophie, just this relatively unknown Prussian princess, almost a nobody in the grand scheme of European royalty.
Right, and then she ends up ruling one of the largest empires in the world. Pretty amazing. So before we get to the whole empress thing, let's go back to the beginning. What was her life like before she got involved with the Russian court?
Well, her upbringing in Prussia was definitely not anything like the extravagance of the Russian court. Her family, they were noble, but they weren't that influential.
And then there's her mother, Joanna. Now, she was ambitious. She sets up this marriage for Sophie with the future Tsar of Russia, Peter III.
Yeah, that was a strategic move for sure. You can almost feel how young Sophie's world just completely changes. Suddenly she's in this foreign country. She has to learn Russian, convert to Russian Orthodoxy, basically transform into Catherine. And on top of that, she has to navigate the complicated and often dangerous world of the Russian court.
It's like she was dropped into a whole new universe. And speaking of the court, we can't forget about Empress Elizabeth. She was the one in charge at the time. And from what I've heard, she wasn't exactly the most welcoming person.
Oh, Empress Elizabeth. She was known for being strong-willed and pretty sharp-tongued. There's even the story about her having a rule that no one else could wear pink while she was around. Can you imagine the pressure on Catherine to adapt and gain favor under someone like that?
That sounds really tough. It makes you wonder, how did Catherine not just survive, but actually thrive in this kind of environment? What were some of the early signs that she was resilient and smart when it came to politics?
Well, that's what makes her story so interesting. She learned quickly, she took in everything around her, she made a real effort to learn Russian and the culture, and even accepted the Orthodox faith. This wasn't just about fitting in, it was a calculated move to be accepted and position herself strategically.
So she was thinking long-term from the very beginning. That really says a lot about how ambitious she was and how well she understood power. But let's talk about her marriage to Peter III. From what I understand, it wasn't exactly a love story.
Not at all. While Peter might have been charming at first, there were some underlying issues. He was known for being unpredictable, and it became clear pretty quickly that they weren't a good match.
The source you sent even mentioned that Catherine was worried about what would happen to Russia if Peter became the ruler. What was it about him that made her so concerned?
Well, when Peter actually became Tsar, his actions just confirmed Catherine's fears. He made a lot of decisions that people didn't like forming an alliance with Prussia. That didn't go over well with a lot of Russians. And then there's his choice to personally lead the army, leaving Catherine in St. Petersburg.
Okay, so that sounds like a turning point. Was Peter leaving a strategic move on his part? Or was it the opportunity that Catherine needed to build up her own power?
It's hard to know what Peter was thinking, but his absence definitely gave Catherine the space to make her own moves. And this is where you really see how clever she was. She used this time to form alliances, especially with influential people in the military, like Grigory Orlov.
Ah, Grigory Orlov. The source mentioned him as someone really important to Catherine, both in terms of politics and her personal life. But we'll get back to that later. Right now, I'm curious about how she handled this whole power struggle. I mean, she was going up against her own husband, the Tsar of Russia.
Yeah, she was in a delicate position, but she was very skilled. You have to remember that Peter wasn't a popular ruler. His actions had alienated people, and Catherine was able to take advantage of that. She presented herself as a more capable and rational leader, someone who understood the needs of the Russian people.
It's like a real-life chess match. Catherine is making these strategic moves, anticipating what her opponent will do, and setting herself up to win. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the actual coup. How did it all go down? Did Peter even see it coming?
So it all happened on July 9th, 1762. That's when everything changed. Catherine, with the support of Orlov and key military figures, made a bold move. She declared herself the new Empress of Russia. This wasn't some behind-the-scenes power grab. It was a full-on seizure of power.
Wow. I can imagine how shocked everyone was. What about Peter? Did he just accept defeat?
He tried to fight back. He even got on a ship hoping to escape to a naval base that was loyal to him. But Catherine seems to have predicted his every move.
So did he manage to get away?
Well, this is where things get even crazier. The Navy had already pledged their loyalty to Catherine, and they actually fired on Peter's ship, forcing him back to shore. Can you imagine the humiliation? And when he got back, it wasn't supporters waiting for him, it was an angry mob of his own people.
Sounds like things had really turned against him. What happened next?
Peter didn't have any other choice but to give up the throne. They put him under house arrest. But then his story ends pretty abruptly. We still don't know for sure how he died. It's another mystery that adds to this already captivating story.
A mystery we'll have to explore. But first, I think we should take a moment to appreciate how far Catherine had come. From being a young, unknown princess to the Empress of Russia. It's a story that deserves a deep dive. And we're just getting started. We left off with Catherine taking control in this whirlwind of events, you know. She outsmarted her husband and secured the throne. But becoming empress, that's just the beginning. Ruling a massive empire like Russia, well, that's a whole different challenge. What were some of the obstacles that she faced when she was in charge?
Oh, she had her fair share of hurdles to overcome. You got to remember, a lot of people in Russia, and certainly across Europe, they were skeptical. Here you have this foreign-born woman claiming this immense power. She really had to prove herself, not just as a ruler, but as someone who truly understood Russia.
Right. You shared a source that highlighted her early actions as empress. What steps did she take to solidify her position and win over those who doubted her?
Catherine, she was incredibly sharp. She knew that power was all about alliances and loyalty. One of the first things she did was make sure she had the support of the military and the nobility. Those were the two most influential groups in Russia.
Makes sense. Without their backing, her reign could have been over pretty quickly. How did she gain their trust and loyalty? Was it purely political strategy, or was there something more to it?
She used a mix of approaches. She was strategic in rewarding those who supported her, giving them titles, land, positions of authority. But she went beyond just those transactional relationships. She cultivated personal connections. She showed a genuine interest in the well-being of her subjects.
That's interesting. So it wasn't just about wielding power, it was about building those relationships and creating a sense of shared purpose. The source also mentioned a key figure who emerged during this time. Grigory Potemkin. He wasn't just a political advisor, right?
No, Potemkin became one of Catherine's closest confidants, both politically and personally. He was a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader. His influence on her reign is huge. He helped shape her policies and played a significant role in expanding Russia's territory.
Ah, yes. Potemkin, the man behind the infamous Potemkin villages. That story always gets me. Can you remind us what that was all about?
Sure. The story goes that Catherine was on this big tour of newly acquired territories in southern Russia. And Potemkin, well, he wanted to impress her. He wanted to show off the region's prosperity. So allegedly, he built these facades of thriving villages along her route. They weren't real villages, though, just elaborate sets meant to hide the actual poverty and hardship of the region.
What a story. Even if it might be more legend than fact. It shows something we've touched on before. Catherine's desire to project this image of strength and prosperity, both within Russia and on the world stage. She really understood how important perception was.
Absolutely. She was a master of image making. But beyond appearances, she was truly invested in modernizing Russia. The Enlightenment had a big influence on her. She embraced ideas of reason, education, and progress. This wasn't just about holding on to power. This was about transforming Russia into a modern, powerful nation.
So she was aiming for a more enlightened and progressive Russia. What were some of the specific reforms she put in place during her time as ruler? What areas did she focus on?
Catherine's reforms touched on all sorts of things in Russian society. She revamped the legal system, introduced new codes, tried to make justice more accessible. Education was another big focus. She expanded access to schooling, especially for women, which was pretty revolutionary back then.
Wow, that's impressive. It's easy to forget how groundbreaking some of these ideas were. It seems like Catherine was ahead of her time in many ways. What about the economy? Did she implement any reforms to boost growth and development?
She did. She really encouraged trade and industry, recognizing how important they were for Russia's overall prosperity. She established banks and credit institutions, trying to modernize the financial system. She even explored new agricultural techniques, looking for ways to increase food production.
It sounds like she was very hands-on when it came to governing. She wasn't just sitting back in her palace issuing orders. She was actively involved in shaping Russia's future.
Exactly. She was deeply involved in running the country, studying reports, talking to advisors, even writing letters to the leading thinkers of the Enlightenment. She saw herself as a modern ruler, responsible for guiding Russia into a new era.
But of course, no ruler's time in power is without challenges or controversies. Even with all her reforms and progressive ideas, Catherine had to make tough choices, choices that weren't always popular or well received. What were some of the more controversial parts of her rule?
Well, one area that people still debate is her aggressive foreign policy. Catherine significantly expanded Russia's borders, especially in the south and west. Through a series of wars and strategic alliances, these expansions brought new territories and resources under Russian control, but they also led to a lot of bloodshed and people being displaced.
Right. Expanding an empire often comes with a human cost. Were there any internal conflicts or challenges she faced during these expansionist campaigns?
There were. One notable example is the Pugachev Rebellion. This peasant uprising really shook Russia. It was a brutal conflict fueled by social and economic inequalities, and it was a direct challenge to Catherine's authority.
This rebellion seems to highlight the complexities of Catherine's reign. On the one hand, she's promoting these Enlightenment ideals, modernizing Russia, expanding its influence. But on the other hand, she's dealing with unrest at home and the consequences of territorial expansion. It's a reminder that history is rarely simple or straightforward.
Exactly. Catherine's reign was this mix of triumphs and challenges, progressive ideas, and practical decisions. And there's one issue that's always a point of contention when evaluating her legacy:
Serfdom.
serfdom. Despite all her enlightened ideals, Catherine didn't get rid of serfdom, which basically kept millions of peasants tied to the land controlled by landowners. It seems like a huge contradiction, especially for a ruler who embraced the principles of the Enlightenment.
It's complicated. Some argue that she was just a product of her time. She was operating within the limitations of the existing social and economic system. Others suggest that she simply wasn't willing to risk upsetting the powerful nobility who benefited from serfdom.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful rulers are limited by the circumstances they inherit. It's a debate that's still going on today, and it's one we'll revisit when we delve further into Catherine's legacy. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and explore a different side of Catherine the Great. We've talked about her political skills and her reforms, but she was also known for supporting the arts. And, well, let's just say her personal life was pretty interesting. Oh, yes. Catherine the Great wasn't just a brilliant ruler. She was also a woman of passion and intrigue. Her love of art, literature, and, let's say, romance added another dimension to her already fascinating character.
The source you shared mentioned her many lovers and her reputation for defying the conventions of her time. Can you tell us more about this side of Catherine? Was it simply personal preference, or was there a political aspect to her relationships?
It was a bit of both, really. Catherine was someone who embraced life to the fullest. She wasn't afraid to follow her heart. But she was also incredibly intelligent. She understood that her relationships could be used to strengthen her position and advance her political goals.
So it wasn't just about romance. It was about power and strategic alliances. We've already talked about Grigory Orlov and Grigory Potemkin. Both of them played significant roles in her life, both politically and personally. Were there other notable figures who shaped her reign and her personal life?
Oh, there were several. Catherine had a knack for spotting talent and charisma. She surrounded herself with people who could contribute to her vision for Russia. Some became trusted advisors, others passionate lovers, and some, like Orlov and Potemkin, were a mix of both.
Sounds like she had a talent for finding and nurturing individuals who could help her achieve her goals while also fulfilling her personal needs and desires. It paints a picture of a woman who was both strategic and passionate, a leader who embraced both power and pleasure.
Precisely. And that's what makes her story so captivating. She defied simple categorization. She was a complex and multifaceted person, capable of great brilliance and ruthless pragmatism, of deep love and calculated ambition. She was a woman who lived life on her own terms, and her story continues to fascinate us centuries later.
It's a story that deserves to be told and retold, explored, and debated. We've only just begun to explore Catherine the Great's life and legacy, but I think it's time for a short break before we dive into the lasting impact she had on Russia and the world. Okay, so we've gone through Catherine the Great's amazing rise to power. We've looked at her impactful but sometimes controversial reign, and even peeked into her fascinating personal life. But, as with any historical figure, the question of legacy always comes up. What mark did Catherine the Great leave on Russia and the world? How should we remember her?
That's a question that historians are always debating. There's no doubt that Catherine transformed Russia. Under her rule, the empire grew its borders, modernized its institutions, and became a major player on the European stage. She really raised Russia's status and set the foundation for its continued growth and influence for centuries to come.
The source we've been looking at actually called her reign a golden age for Russia. What were some of the things that contributed to that perception of her rule? What defined this golden age?
Well, Catherine was a huge supporter of the arts and sciences. Her reign saw a blossoming of cultural and intellectual activity. She established academies, libraries, and theaters, attracting talented people from all over Russia and Europe. Think about figures like playwright Denis von Wiesen and composer Dmitry Bortniansky. Their works really embody the creative energy of that time.
It's amazing how a ruler's vision can shape the artistic and intellectual landscape of a nation. She wasn't just focused on military strength and expanding her territory. She understood how important it was to cultivate creativity and support intellectual growth. It's a side of Catherine that we don't always hear about.
Absolutely. And we can't forget her contributions to education, particularly for women. She set up schools for girls, advocating for their access to knowledge and intellectual development. That was a radical idea back then. And it shows how committed she was to progress and enlightenment.
Right? It reminds us that progress often means challenging the status quo and pushing boundaries. It's easy for us to look back and take these things for granted. But in Catherine's time, these were truly revolutionary ideas. But as we've talked about, her legacy is complicated. Along with her achievements, there are undeniable shadows. The territorial expansions that came at a human cost, the internal struggles, and, of course, the continuation of serfdom. How do we make sense of these seemingly contradictory parts of her rule?
Yeah, it's a challenge that historians are still wrestling with. Was she a visionary leader who truly wanted to move Russia into a new era, or is she just a clever opportunist who used enlightened ideas to hide her ambition for power and personal gain? Maybe, as is often the case with historical figures, the truth is somewhere in between.
It reminds us that people are rarely just one thing, especially those with immense power. We're all a mix of contradictions and complexities, capable of doing great things and making decisions that in hindsight seem wrong.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying history so interesting. It's not about judging the past based on our modern values. It's about trying to understand the context, the motivations, and the intricacies of what happened back then. It's about recognizing that even the most celebrated figures had their flaws and made decisions that we might find unacceptable today.
It's a valuable lesson to learn, especially now when we often simplify complex issues and put people into these neat categories of good and bad. Catherine's story forces us to resist those easy labels and embrace the messy reality of history.
You got it. And in doing so, we get a deeper understanding not only of the past, but also of ourselves. After all, we are all products of history, shaped by the events and people who came before us.
So as we finish up this deep dive into the life and legacy of Catherine the Great, where do we land? How should we remember this woman who went from obscurity to becoming one of the most powerful rulers in history?
I think we should remember her as a woman of extraordinary ambition, intelligence, and resilience. A woman who defied expectations and navigated a world run by men to achieve incredible things. We should acknowledge her contributions to Russia's cultural and intellectual growth, her efforts to modernize the nation, and her willingness to challenge traditional norms. But we should also remember the complexities and contradictions of her time as ruler, the human cost of her territorial ambitions, and her failure to address the injustice of serfdom.
It's a balanced view that acknowledges both her accomplishments and her failings. And maybe that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive. History is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads, each representing different perspectives, motivations, and outcomes.
And it's up to us as students of history to examine those threads closely, to appreciate the intricacies of the past, and to allow those insights to shape our understanding of the present and the future.
Well said. This has been an amazing journey through Catherine the Great's life. I hope you, our listener, have found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we have. We encourage you to keep exploring her story, to dig deeper into the sources, and to come to your own conclusions about this complex and influential figure.
And as always, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the incredible world of history. Until next time.